Give me a sec to get things set up, guys. I'm gonna fire up some music for you.
They call her Nana, queen of the throne. Love and war, she claims them both her own. From Sumerian clay, her story unfolds. A goddess descended, a tale yet untold. She journeyed to the depths, the underworld's call. Faced her own shadow, surrendered her all. Stripped of her power, her beauty concealed. But death couldn't hold her, her fate was revealed. Resurrected, rising, a radiant queen. Inanna the mighty, the fiercest ever seen. Lightning flashing, thunder in her hand. Shaking the heavens, commanding the land. Priestess of power, her heart ablaze. Guiding humanity through life's dark maze. Like a wild bull, she charges the night. Her cry echoes, a soul-stirring fright. Mountains tremble, the earth feels her might. Inanna's fury, a breathtaking sight. But in her wrath, compassion resides. A flood of emotions where love and war collide. She bathes in moonlight, her spirit renewed. Adorned in her garments, a queen imbued. Resurrected, rising, a radiant queen. Inanna the mighty, the fiercest ever seen. Lightning flashing, thunder in her hand. Shaking the heavens, commanding the land. Priestess of power, her heart ablaze. Guiding humanity through life's dark maze. Life's dark maze. Dark maze. From Enki, the wise, her destiny unfurled. Queenship and godship to rule the world. On her throne she sits with Dumuzi by her side. All creatures bow down, in her glory confide. Her gaze captivates, her yoke sets them free. Inanna, the goddess for all eternity. Resurrected, rising, a radiant queen. Inanna the mighty, the fiercest ever seen. Lightning flashing, thunder in her hand. Shaking the heavens, commanding the land. Priestess of power, her heart ablaze. Guiding humanity through life's dark maze. My maze. Inanna, Inanna, her name we proclaim. A beacon of hope, an eternal flame. Through darkness she guides, with love and with grace. The radiant queen, forever in her place.
All right. So, today, guys, we're going to take a little trip to the underworld. We're going to be talking a little bit about, in more depth, what my video last night was talking about. The first part of, if you haven't seen it already, it is up on the page. It's the first part of the Underworld Descent, the Journey of Inanna, where she undergoes this massive transformation. She goes into the underworld, basically disrobes all of her heavenly and earthly powers, dies, and is resurrected. It's the first known template that we have in the Western Esoteric Tradition of a dying and rising god. This is the template that all the other myths are basically built on, and it's incredibly important. It's influenced countless religions along the way, and this is the oldest one that we have record of. My estimation is it's not the oldest. There's probably tribal myths, tribal folklore that are much deeper into history. But this is the first on record that we have. And it's very intriguing because it's slightly different than all the others that follow it. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through this presentation. This particular myth and the way that it interplays with all of her other known myths is vital to understand the whys, because in the video that I launched last night, we just talk about her descent, not really her motivations, not really the big why as to why it feels like she's being done dirty in some ways, why it feels like she's surrendering when she's this massively powerful queen of heaven. What are the motivations behind this descent? And that's some of what we're going to talk about today. So let's just kind of get into it. Okay. So the historical setting, this the dating of it, it's really hard to say, but we can go back to 4000 BC with this, maybe even deeper. Inanna, around that time, 4000 to 3500 BC, and afterwards she carries on in Ishtar. She carries on in Astarte in Canaan. But this goes way back, 4000 BC. We'll look at the family tree where Inanna sits within this Sumerian religion, but historical setting, we're looking about 4000 3500 BCE. Now, the political and religious significance in Sumer. At this time, she is the number one deity as far as popularity among the people. What we can kind of tell is she's central to all the other myths going on. Oh, thanks. Got some comments here already from Brooke. I'm gonna go ahead and pop you up on the screen here, Brooke. Does it? It's good to see people listening. I agree. I wish more people were talking about this one too, but it gives me an interesting an angle, right? It'll be something that it's a secret. We're all sharing it here on the channel. But so Inanna is this pivotal figure. She's in all the myths. She is central to the entire story of ancient Sumer. She acts as a template for the human condition as well. And it's intriguing because she's the only one who does this from a feminine perspective. If you follow the rest of the myths, the myths out of Egypt, the myths out of Greece, this feminine edge kind of gets lost as things shift from the matriarchal to the patriarchal. And again, I've got here on the slide here, it's the first documented katabasis. It's the first documented underworld descent, which is it's really fascinating. We are obsessed with death as creatures who are doomed to die. And we reflect that in the stories that we tell ourselves about the eternal ones, the gods. What's intriguing is in ancient Sumer, the gods are not immortal necessarily. They can be killed, as we see with Inanna. And the same thing in Egypt holds true. They can be killed. Dionysus, dismembered, can be killed. But somewhere along the way, even in ancient Greece, they become immortalized, they become unkillable, and they lose, in some cases, the relatability to us as humans. And I think they also we lose that edge of understanding what these myths allegorize within our own lives, and how these myths are teaching us ways to be within the world. And we're going to kind of talk about that today too. For now, let's keep this moving. So what is a katabasis? Well, it's the hero's journey, but it's a specific kind of hero's journey into the underworld, and it tends to deal with the dismemberment of the psyche, the dismemberment of the physical body, or the perception of the physical body. In Greek, it means going down, descent into the underworld. It's a common motif in mythology and literature, representing a hero's quest for knowledge or transformation, or the retrieval of a lost partner. We'll see that in some of the other myths that we touch on. And the underworld sometimes symbolizes, not always, but the unconscious, the undifferentiated, the shadow side of the self. It's, we look at it from a literal point of view, they're going to the realm of the dead, but that doesn't necessarily mean the actual dead. In an allegory, it could mean something deep in our psyche, some of the things that we've shut away. So it's often related to our deepest fears or some of the challenges that we can confront. especially if we start to kind of shift this into what do we use this for from a modern perspective. So, what are some examples of katabasis? Inanna's descent is the first one. Odysseus's journey to Hades, where he seeks out Tiresias the prophet, is a great one, and that's one I hope to touch on the channel eventually. Aeneas in Virgil's Aeneid travels to the underworld to meet his father. Orpheus and Eurydice, the attempt to rescue his beloved from the underworld, is a great one. Dante's Inferno is another one. We have others that are similar in scope. Yeshua, Jesus, does it. Osiris ends up ruling the underworld. Persephone also undergoes this. Dionysus also undergoes this. It is a very, very common motif in the Western esoteric tradition. But what is the significance? This symbolic death and rebirth, this process of confronting the shadow, confronting the dark, confronting death, and emerging transformed. Death is a transformation. Right? It is not an end. It is a birthing into something else. And when we look at it from the perspective of these myths, it's allegorizing the ability to face a challenge, come out on the other side of it changed. It's a journey of facing fears, of overcoming those challenges, and gaining self-knowledge. Almost all of these mythic structures are not necessarily the conquest of death itself. It is the understanding of who you are, the death of the false aspects of self, going back to the Orphic Delphi maxim, know thyself. That is the key to all of it. Odin undergoes it to gain knowledge of self and the universe by proxy. Osiris, also knowledge of self. Dionysus, knowledge of self. It's really a deeply rooted part of our psyche as human beings. So what I'm really getting at here is that there is a modern relevance for us today. And this is something that you can undertake yourself through ritualized praxis. I've done it myself a couple of times, probably more than a couple of times. Most recently going through Osirian rites, where you're basically going through the underworld gate by gate, confronting these pieces of self, facing the fears associated with death, and there's so much more to it. It's hard to even do or talk about in this context. It's just something that you have to experience. We've lost some of that in our modern religions. Our modern spirituality shies away from this concept of death. We don't talk about it. We don't deal with it. And we're missing a huge part of the human experience when we do that. So I highly recommend, if you can find any and all literature on katabasis. I'll do more on this and the channel in the future, but I don't want to get stuck on this modern aspect. It's something that is a very personal thing. There are plenty of models, and if you look at the myths, you can kind of design them yourself. Okay, how would I take this structure and act it out? Because that's what most ritual is an acting out of a story, of a narrative that helps us understand a deeper truth, to gain deeper insights through reenactment, through dramatic reenactment. It's about confronting our demons, man, and it's a powerful, powerful, powerful ritual. So, in the story, and I might bring this up, it's important to know where Inanna's at before she goes into this descent. She begins the narrative in heaven, and then she has this sudden decision to go into the underworld, to basically arm up. So it says in the beginning, she's in the great above, she's in the great above, she's in the great above. There's this triple repetition of the phrase, and I'll just pull it up and recite it here because it's important. From the great above, she opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, the goddess opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, Inanna opened her ear to the great below. My lady abandoned heaven and earth to descend to the underworld. Inanna abandoned heaven and earth to descend to the underworld. She abandoned her office of holy priestess to descend to the underworld. In Uruk, she abandoned her temple to descend to the underworld. In Babtabira, she abandoned her temple to descend to the underworld. In Zabalam, she abandoned her temple to descend to the underworld. In Adab, she abandoned her temple to descend to the underworld. In Nippur, she abandoned her temple to descend to the underworld. In Kish, she abandoned her temple to descend to the underworld. In Akkad, she abandoned her temple to descend to the underworld. It's really important in these first stages because what it looks like is why are they repeating themselves? Why do they keep repeating these pieces over and over again? This myth happens deeper in the mythic archetype, in the mythic narrative of Inanna. She's already attained this queenly status. She's attained this power through various other myths, and now she is arming herself for what she already knows she has to go through. She knows she has to go through this katabasis. She has to descend into the underworld. She knows she has to die, and she does so willingly. That is one thing that is different than almost all the other myths of the katabasis. They don't all go through with it willingly. I think the only one that really compares is you've got Jesus's, his seems willingly. Odin's sacrifice is very willing, but Inanna goes through it willingly. Dionysus is dismembered against his will. Osiris dismembered against his will, murdered. Inanna is the first to say, I'm doing this and I'm doing it for everybody. I got everybody. I'm going to do this. And so she prepares herself. She takes all of the powers that she has accumulated through her mythic journey, and she arms up. She goes to each of these temples, acquires each of the sacred regalia, she dons them, and then she begins her descent. So this begins earlier, where she has this instance with Enki. She has a very clever element to her, Inanna. She has this conquest where she goes to Enki in his element, and she basically gets him drunk. She is ambitious at this point. She's had a couple of wins. She's decided that she is going to be the queen of heaven, the queen of earth. She's going to be it. But in order to do so, she has to acquire the power of wisdom, all the sacred powers which Enki has. So she has to go to him for this. Now, he probably knows this is going to happen. He allows it to happen. It feels like when you read the story, she gets him drunk and then tricks him and steals some of this stuff from him. You see this mimicked in the story of Isis and Ra. Isis produces a snake out of sand that is venomless. It bites Ra, and Ra is in one of his more feeble states in the Egyptian myth, and he thinks he's going to die. So she dupes him into revealing his magical name, his name of power. And this is a mimic, I think, to the Sumerian, unless we get some more information that Egypt is also concurrent with them with those dates. I think it's possible. Both of these stories are so similar. So she gets Enki drunk. She says, "Will you give these all to me?" He basically says yes. In the myth, he kind of comes to his wits and says, "Oh no, what have I done?" and tries to take them back. She's got all of the me, or sometimes with an S here, but the me means it's a sacred item of power. Could mean sometimes an actual physical item, but it's more conceptually a specific kind of power, whether that's craftsmanship, whether that's divine rule, whether that's wisdom. There's a number of them that in the myth she claims from him. He tries to take it back. She brings in her heavy Ninshibur, who is one of her Sukal, basically an angel of sorts, is a lower level deity in service to a higher level deity, who defends her from Enki's watery demons. And she wins. She takes all of those to her abode in Uruk, and that basically kind of it shows that there's some political stuff going on behind the scenes. If you understand uh, Sumer, it's a bunch of city states, and each of the city states, these cities, have their own patron deity. And from time to time, they go to war with each other. And whenever one is sacked, then the transference of power goes from one city to the other. Now, at this time, when this mythic cycle is being written, Inanna and Uruk are the center of power, and she inherits that from Enlil. But in order for her to consolidate reign in this new generation of gods, she not only has to have the divine decree of Enlil, she needs the wisdom of Enki, wisdom that he earned through katabasis. It's the wisdom that he earned by going through the same exact rites. So he knows what's up. He gives this over to her willingly, puts up a little bit of a fight, but it also puts an interesting backdrop to the Descent because the Descent is colored with all these different characters. Enki kind of provides her the template. Here's what you do to go down in order to solidify your power. But if we look at this now, and I've switched this to the family tree, we can kind of see the hierarchy of what's going on here. We've got An, the sky god, who is basically out of the city of Uruk. We have Namu, the goddess of the watery deep, water and earth. We've kind of talked about this on the channel before with the Orphic mode of talking. And then we have Urash, or Ki, the earth goddess. So the sky god mates with either the water goddess or the earth goddess and produces two kind of lines here, Enki and Enlil. Okay. Now Enlil gives birth to Nana and through that Inanna, right? Enki gives birth down here to Dumazi, who later Inanna marries in a sacred marriage rite as part of her story. Enki and Dumazi, part of this kind of watery energy. We've got this earth goddess energy. Both of them contain the sky, so they both got the element of the heavens. But Dumazi, Geshtinana, Gilgamesh, all these people over here, Gugulana, ereshkigal, they seem kind of like separated here. This is from Samuel Noel Kramer's and Diane Wolkstein's book. But what I'm looking at here, what I think is interesting is we have this sort of competition in the story. Who's going to rule? And Inanna has to prove that she is worthy of ruling in this stead. So in most of these mythic pantheons, we see the transference of power, the succession of power. Inanna's story, which we'll go into a little bit here and we'll do in some other lives, is one of a progression of maturity that shows that she is capable and or willing to surrender power at the right time to basically be handed the keys to the kingdom, if you will. But I think there's some chicanery happening here in a lot of the story. Enki knows what's up. He's been there before. He's sometimes a rival for her and sometimes an ally. And then you have Dumazi, who plays a very key role in the Descent myth, who kind of does a power grab for what she already has accumulated when she dies in the Descent. And just looking at this map, I'm like, it makes sense why Enki is involved in all of the process, and then also why Dumazi is kind of like happy. Inanna steals the power from Enki, and this is kind of like a get back. It feels like it's hard to prove though, because really what these myths are more than likely allegories that teach us about the human condition and what we need to do. So I'm going to continue and let's look at her narrative arc as we go through this thing. The first of her myths is the one with the Halupu tree, where she protects it. She envisions, she protects it from the serpent. She ends up using it to create a throne in the Halupu tree myth. I'm going to go over these more individually in future lives, but this is where she kind of gets the idea of I can be more than what I am right now. Then we kind of move on, and you see her stealing the power from Enki in the next myth. Now, the chronology of these myths is up for debate, but you can see a clear narrative arc between them. So she steals power. She starts to become ambitious. Then, as the queen of all things, when she acquires that, she falls in love. She falls in love with Enki's son Dumazi, who's the shepherd king consort kind of guy. But she is in charge. She is the thing. Dumuzi's secondary. He's not very important. It is interesting that he's a shepherd king and that his city is one of metallurgy, one of craftsmanship. We see that kind of mimicked in Hephaestus and Aphrodite, and we see that mimicked in Asherah and Yahweh as well. They are mirrors of this original mythic structure. And I think it's really fascinating to see the the woman at the top, the man in the consort role, and what we eventually get, which is just a flipping of that. And what we see is the initial plugging away of this chipping away at the matriarchal power structure within this myth, with Dumuzi at the kind of like the middle point of the myth, kind of sitting proud and shocked when Inanna comes back, almost like he had something to do with her descent in the first place. So, anyways, she marries him because she's in love with him. There's this beautiful story of them falling in love, which talks about sacred marriage, talks about the fertility that she kind of gains. So she gains ambition, power, but then she gains fertility and power in another way. And then she goes through a very interesting point in the arc of her story where she gets into it with Gilgamesh. And that's the story, the classic story of Gilgamesh in general. She wants Gilgamesh. She wants to have him, to possess him. She wants to make love to him, and he refuses her. And she's like, "Well, who the fuck do you think you are? If you think if you think that you are all that, who are you?" So she basically goes and complains to her dad, sends the bull of heaven to go crash through the city of Uruk and punish Gilgamesh. Well, Gilgamesh and his buddy Enkidu, they end up basically killing Gugulana, the bull of heaven, who is the husband, the consort of her sister, the queen of the underworld, ereshkigal. And so essentially through her ambition, through her overreach of power, through her learning, really, she impacts her sister and her sister's world, and she learns a lesson. She learns a lesson out of that. And so it comes down to the next piece of that, and that is what we're talking about within the video that I launched last night and today, and that is the acceptance of relinquishing and surrendering of power. You can go one of two ways once you have this kind of all-time power, and that is you can either become a dodo bird and think that you have everything, because remember, the Sumerian gods, they can be killed, they're not eternal, they are subject to the same rules as we are in many ways, and I think Inanna understands that, and that's why she voluntarily goes. She arms up with all of these symbols of power. She goes down to be an example. And in that process, she gains an idea of what her role in the cosmic order is. It's not about taking over everything that all the other gods have. It's about ruling with some sort of maturity, with wisdom. And in order to gain that wisdom, you have to go through the katabasis. You have to die. That's how Enki does it. Enki is the one with the what they call the ear, the ear that can hear. And that is what I think he kind of has trained her to do throughout this entire narrative arc. And she has to go do it willingly. And so she does. And so she arms up. She goes to all of the city states that she controls, and she gets the sacred regalia, the sacred mess, the sacred me of each of them. Her crown, her lapis beads, the double strand of beads, the breastplate, the gold ring, the measuring rod, and the royal robe. They're stored at each one of these cities. The crown, of course, is her symbol of divine authority, her power to rule, and that's the power to rule over heaven and earth. The lapis, that's her divine status. That's her connection. You can kind of see it. You know, it's around your neck. It connects you. Lapis was a very important stone to them, as it was for the Egyptians. The double strand of beads. Sometimes in some translations, it's like there's a double strand of beads. Sometimes there's a scepter. The double strand of beads on top of the lapis symbolizes her dual nature in most cases. It's her sexual power, her fertility, but also her connection to warfare. She is a dual natured goddess, and so this double strand of beads is a kind of a nod to that. The breastplate, which is also a nod to her role as a war goddess, says that she can defend herself. But there's a really interesting thing that I have not really come to understand. Is there's some other pieces. There's a hair binding that she has. There is a specific makeup on her eyes, which denotes some sort of ritual praxis, and the ritual makeup, and then the marking on the breastplate itself says "Come, man, come." That I have yet to crack the code on, and that's probably because I haven't been spending a lot of time in Sumerian studies at this time. I've been so wrapped up in the Orphic mode, but as this was calling, as I am ever in service to her mysteries, I had to kind of switch gears. And as I do the next few of these videos, not only on her, uh, the conspiracy with her and Dumazi, but her return to power, I will dig a little deeper. I just kind of ran out of time on this one. The gold ring represents her bonds of marriage. Also, it goes with her Venusian aspects. The ring of binding goes with the Venusian aspects. If we're looking at these gates as celestial planets, the traditional way to look at it would be kind of looking at it through the Chaldean order, Saturn, Jupiter, the way that we all kind of think about it in the Western esoteric tradition. But the city states don't match. When you look at the myth, they had a different order in which she accumulates and then disrobes. And the cities and their known symbolic matching don't match the traditional Chaldean uh, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars for a descent. And so when I was putting this together and looking at it, I was like, we have changed some of what this original myth has to say. And we'll get into that. Then there's the measuring rod, which is her power of administration, justice, and to maintain order in the cosmos. And then finally, the robe. Um, this is her sovereignty. It's the final piece. It's like the final shedding. Now she's naked. She's vulnerable. She's completely at the behest of the woman who she scorned. She killed Gugulana through her ambition, and now she's going to pay the price with ereshkigal. Excuse me. So there's a couple of critical moments within the descent pattern that I think are interesting to point out. It's the initial challenge. She comes to the outer gates banging on the door saying like, this is who I am. And she's armed to the teeth, and it sends Nettie, the gatekeeper, screaming into the throne room of ereshkigal and saying, oh my God, there's this all-powerful queen of heaven out there. And ereshkigal really doesn't flinch, which I think is funny. She's like, yeah, well, okay, take all of her shit away, and where are we? So then there's the stripping process where each gate has to surrender a certain part of her power. And then there's the death moment where she surrenders entirely. I feel like there was always more to this myth than probably was within the reenactment of it, but what survives on the clay tablets probably isn't the full depth of what they were talking about. It never is. And I bet there was some sort of heart to heart between the two of them. Like, look, I have made a huge mistake. I'm putting myself um, at your whim. Like, do as you will. But then you have this interesting turn of events with the intervention of Enki. So if Enki is wanting Inanna to die so that he can reclaim his sacred regalia, it doesn't make much sense why he would then go and help her out. Because Ninshibur goes to all the other gods, even Inanna's dad, Enlil, and he basically, or her grandfather, really, because Nana is her father. Ninshibur goes to both of them, and they both go, this is on her. She was really, really ambitious, and we kind of don't like it, so we're going to let her rot. And the only one who steps in is Enki. And he doesn't do it directly either, but he's smart. He understands what's going on. So he picks from the dirt of his fingernails and creates these two asexual beings, the Kugara and the Galatur, which are asexual. Really intriguing because in this land, there's this in Kur, it's completely infertile. It's completely sterile. The land of the dead is completely sterile, but ereshkigal has this insatiable motor for sex. In fact, when she finally gets a new husband in Nergal, it says that she basically pins him down for 6 days and is still hungry for more. So she has this insatiable lust for fertility and probably some jealousy of the fertility of Inanna as well. And we see this kind of play out. Anything that comes into the realm of the dead with this power of fertility, with the power of life, is like instantly latched onto by the beings and the spirits of this realm. Enki knows this. So he basically creates these asexual beings that are able to resist the wiles of this ereshkigal, who must be somewhat irresistible in the case of this insatiability that she has. And so, in order to go into this realm, Inanna also has to disrobe her powers of fertility in order just to enter. And then, of course, we won't get too much into this, but there is a price of return here. There is a specific price that Inanna or someone else is going to have to pay for her to come back into life. She gets revived by the two figures that Enki sends, and from there she has to make a decision, and we'll get to that eventually. But I want to talk about each gate before we talk about the other katabasis myths. So the Shigura, there's not much on this word, and I'm going to dig a little deeper because the crown itself, there's a couple of words that you can kind of look at and go, there's some serpent aspects to it. Serpent, wisdom, crown, we can kind of make those connections. There's a connection to the serpent and her first myth with the halupa tree, and there's some general serpent fertility symbols there as well. But the first gate is this paradox of surrender to gain actual control, to gain actual power. In order for Inanna to do this, she has to relinquish what she's already gained. In order to really solidify her reign as the Queen of Heaven, she knows she has to give this up at this point in time. So the first gate, she gives that up. It symbolizes her sovereignty, her divine self-awareness, and its removal signifies a willingness to dissolve the illusion of control and embrace a deeper reality. These are not just things she's wearing. There are deep allegorical teachings within each one of these. Um, and you can see this happening in others. Christ's kenosis, the Buddha's renunciation, all of them have this first step of I have to renounce something in order to gain true power and true realization, wisdom, insight. That's what she's here to gain, just like Enki already has because he's done the right. That's what she's after. So this relates to Uruk. It's the first city she goes to. That's where she attains the crown. And if we associate it to the Chaldean order of planets, I kind of have here, Saturn doesn't necessarily always fit with Uruk because Uruk's also the Venusian center point. But Saturn, Enlil, they tend to work out, so I kept it. The first gate aligns with this planet of boundaries, discipline, structure, emphasize the importance of accepting our limitations and our frameworks for manifestation. There are some other crossovers with some gods. If you start looking at just the correspondences of different things, how you would fit this together into a ritual. But if you're doing this for yourself, this kind of surrender in this part of a ritual would be the conscious release of your attachments, the acceptance of your vulnerability, the acceptance that you don't know what's coming, alignment with a divine pattern that has already brought you to this point. If you're undergoing a katabasis rite for yourself, just go with it. There's a reason you're attracted to it. If you're watching this right now, there's a reason you're attracted to it. You need to undergo this ego death in order to get to the next part of your spiritual development. That is the arc of Inanna. She's the template for human existence. We get born, we have ambition, we overuse our power, we learn a lesson, we gain some wisdom, we pay the price through some sort of suffering, and then we arise from those ashes stronger and more mature, hopefully to wield our power in a more responsible way. Uruk is the city of that divine authority, and it serves as the earthly reflection of the first gate's principles, the principles that she learns upon the relinquishment of her power. The second gate, she relinquishes her lapis beads. Lapis usually is assigned with sight, and it was with the Egyptians as well as the Sumerians. It's one of their favorite stones, probably because it was beautiful and there was a lot of abundance in that area of the world. If you use it yourself as a stone, I'm sure you probably have some sort of connection to that as a vision stone. But her relinquishing of the lapis at this point um, signifies, I think, a willingness to see something differently. It's a dissolving of our earthly sight and an acceptance of some form of spiritual sight. It's celestial wisdom versus our more earthly wisdom. And it symbolizes a willingness to relinquish our reliance on external sight and embrace insight, our internal wisdom, our internal compass. And this stage surrenders, or the surrender echoes the concept of knowing through unknowing. I'm Everything that I know has served me up to this point. That's fantastic. But I don't know what I don't know. And the most wise choice that we can usually make in most situations is to say, I don't know. I don't know, and remain teachable. Beginner's mind, they talk about in Zen. Always remain teachable. Um, so this aligns with Bad Tiberia, and this stage this is where it's interesting. Jupiter would have taken us to Nippur if we were looking at them like in the Chaldean order. And it's originally how I was kind of planning to do this, and I started looking at it, and I go, no, that's not right. Bad Tabira is the site where um, Dumazi has his cult, and so it's interesting that this is the second of them. But I think that her relinquishing her connection to Dumazi this early on in the gate system is really fascinating, and it takes us to some really interesting places. I think in the future of this study, if we look at that order of things, if we can kind of remove ourselves from the standard planetary matrix that we all work in the Western Esoteric tradition, and see what they were working with here in this myth. Um, Dumazi is not really important enough to have his own planetary correspondence. He's so secondary to what Inanna is. He does become more interesting and more important later because, in my opinion, Dumazi is basically what Yahweh will become in the future. But she goes to Bad Tabira or next, and that's where she acquires the lapis lazuli, the sight beads. It's the center of sacred metallurgy. It represents the integration of divine power with the earthly craft. So it's she's relinquished her crown, and if we're thinking about it, that's a symbol of heaven. So we have to come down to earth at the next level in order for this to keep kind of working or for it to make sense. The journey from Uruk to Bad Tabira symbolizes a movement from cosmic to embodied experience, from the cosmic unity to experience of dual love, of partnership and transformative powers within creation. And so I think that's what they're getting at here is it's more of an axial thing from heaven to earth first in these gates, which makes the next gate a little bit make more sense to me. The double strand of beads, which represent her duality as love and war goddess, is dissolving the illusion of separation for her. She's embracing the paradox of unity within duality. This double strand symbolizes the sacred marriage of polarities, the creative tension that gives rise to the manifest world. That polarity is what creates the opportunity for that synthesis to happen, with looking at it from like a Pythagorean view. Its removal signifies a willingness to transcend duality and embrace the inherent oneness of existence. This stage echoes the mystical principle that all separation that we perceive ultimately serves the purpose of deeper union. So as we become manifest, as we come into this embodied experience, it's because we are seeking deeper union. This idea that has become so prevalent in the Western esoteric tradition of the only way to accept or to achieve union is by ascent and getting kind of like out, this kind of escapist mode, is missing the point. I think we can look all the way down to this myth deeper and deeper in history than all the other stuff that comes out later, and see that the mode of understanding unity is to go deeper into this experience as a human being, not try to get out. There's no fault in this experience. It is the experience we're supposed to have. And the Sumerians, I think, knew that. It's a deeper union. Go deeper. Go in, go in, go in, not out. It's not out there. It's all in here. This signifies her dual nature. We talked about that. Blah, blah, blah. Let's move on to the next piece of this. So, Zabalam is the place where she goes to get the double beads. It's a secondary seat of her power and represents the Martian aspect of her. So Zabalam is where lover and warrior come together. And this journey from Uruk to Badabira to Zabalam signifies a movement from external authority to internal integration and embracing the fullness of one being. So we kind of made a triangle here. It's like a first triad if we were going to go it. So it goes from sovereignty of cosmic sovereignty to sacred craft to integrating our identity. Fourth gate, her breastplate of divine attraction. If we're following that Chaldean order, we're at the sun at this point, which I think is interesting because if we're kind of like crown, neck, breastplate, we're moving down as she disrobes. Surrendering the magnetism of love. Now, this is a profound shift in Inanna's journey where she confronts the need to surrender her outward directed power and attraction and embrace a deeper, more receptive form of love. Inanna is very much like she's a big personality, especially the way that she's written in the myths. It's all about Inanna for almost everybody in the myths. And this is her releasing that. She's like, I don't need protection. I don't need that anymore. Her attraction, her outward attraction serves as, I think, a piece of armor. And there's something to learn there. I think there's really something to learn there. Our outward persona, no matter how extroverted it might seem, at times is a piece of armor. It's a mask. It's a shield. And this symbolizes this magnetic allure that she gives up in this moment and a willingness to be vulnerable and open to the transformation that's going to come. And it connects to, interestingly, in this one, we're connecting to the Earth Mother. The Earth Mother as the center, as the sun, I thought was really, really intriguing when I started to flip this on itself. And I was like, okay, well, Adab, where that's the cult center of Ninhursag, represents the mother goddess mysteries. The mother goddess mysteries in the sun, that doesn't really swing with what we're dealing with in later mystical traditions. The sun is a father, a heaven archetype. It's definitely not related to the mother. But if the sun is going to follow that Chaldean order, then it lines up at least with these cities, the way that they happen in her descent, with the mother goddess mysteries, which may suggest that at that time they still hadn't moved to a father god mentality. And that makes sense why Inanna would be so popular at that time. This journey to Adab signifies a deepening of Inanna's connection to her own feminine power and transformation of her understanding of love itself. Surrender of her life-giving capacity happens at this point. Her motherly, procreative power is drained from her, which probably is something that ereshkigal wants because she can't produce in the infertile hellscape that is Kur. Yes. Brooke has a great point here. The ego is the shield that is so necessary to survive in the world. It's the current state, and the state has been in since the beginning. The shield needs to be picked up when needed. I agree. It is a shield, and I'm definitely not one that says smash the ego. The ego is just doing its job. In my opinion, if you let the ego run the show, it's like going to work, and then the least qualified person to be the manager to run the show, you say, here's the job. You should run the show. The ego's job isn't to run the show. That's why we do these spiritual practices, is to let that spirit, our deep spirit, our higher self, run the show. The ego does its job to protect us. to keep us from running into the same wall 3 times. It's just doing its job. It's just not well suited to do all the jobs. It's just not really good at those jobs. So don't give it that job. Don't give it that job. But at this point, so she's surrendering her fertility, her feminine principle. The 5th gate, she surrenders what's most important to Inanna herself, the gold ring. It is the symbol of Venusian binding, the Venusian order. It is a symbol of perfection, proportion, cosmic order, and she surrenders it. The willingness to release her attachment to the rigid structures and embrace fluidity in the unmanifest world. That's what the underworld is. It's unmanifest reality. It's that deep subconsciousness that's in all of us. And this stage echoes the mystical principle that true order arises from chaos. She's starting to get that all of her order is derived from this realm that ereshkigal has. Everything that is built on the earthly plane, all of the order that is established is built from the belly of chaos. And that becomes true in almost all of the philosophical mottos later. Chaos is what feeds order, and then order disintegrating then feeds chaos. And that is that ring. We're seeing that there in that ring. It's a golden ring of chaos and order, and that's what binds the universe. Paradoxically, though, Inanna herself, the goddess of order, of measure, the regent of the universe, surrenders even her own principles for a deeper understanding of everything. And that's what a leader does. That's what somebody who is going to be good at being in charge does. Now this brings us back to Nippur, which is the seat of Enlil and where the basic derivation of divine order comes from. Enlil is where Inanna receives the divine decree of rulership, because Enlil is the one who is meant to rule, at least within the Sumerian superstructure. The surrender of the gold ring signifies the integration of order and chaos. We kind of talked about that. It's the religious capital. It's the city of the cosmic principle of divine order and law. And Enlil, as that father, she inherits that divine mandate from. She releases it. And it's only through, I think, her releasing of the desire to rule that she maintains the ability to rule afterwards. It's a test. If you want to rule, will you give it up? Will you give it up willingly? And she does so. We find out later in the myth, some people who wanted to rule, Dumazi, doesn't want to give it up so easily. We find that out when he runs away from his destiny. And he pays the price. He pays the price. But Inanna pays it up front without crying about it. She just lays it down. At the 6th gate, she gives up the rod and line, more signs of order and measure. It's a profound shift for her from this structured knowledge that she's gained from Enki. She's gained all of this wisdom and knowledge from Enki, and now she has to rely on intuition. She has to rely on direct experience, and that's what a katabasis is all about. It's not about all the pieces that you bring with you, because the mind isn't going to serve you in those moments. If you get into one of these deep katabatic rites, the mind is not going to help you, but your intuition, that deep gut feeling, that will help you in those moments. It's getting in tune with that. The idea of this rod and line, she has to put that down to release the limitations of the rational mind and embrace this insight driven mind. And that's really important for us as well to understand that if we are undergoing some of these rites ourselves. It's humility. It's openness to the fact that I don't know. I don't know, and that's okay. Whatever needs to come through in that moment to teach me is going to work. And that relates to Mercury. That relates to the city of Kish, which is Enki's realm. Just like I said before, Enki underwent these rites. He has the ear that they say in the myths. He has the ear for wisdom. He can listen to it. He can listen to it from the water. He comes from the watery depths of the water goddess. And so this is like one of her final pieces that she has to give up, is her rational mind. And that really fits with Mercury. So you can see the Chaldean order of planets kind of fitting here and there, but there's just some different switches, and I think that just has to do with matriarchal versus patriarchal and how we've come to know things within the Western Esoteric Tradition. In the 7th gate, the final gate, is the robe. It's the final garment. It's the final piece of the puzzle. She is fully naked, fully vulnerable, bearing her divine essence in front of ereshkigal, and I think that really pisses ereshkigal off. So you dare to come here and show off, um, and she kills her for it. She kills her right there on the spot. Boom, struck dead. But that's not the end of her story. But it does echo this principle that I think is older than even these societies that we all study now. It's deep in the animism of our species, that true liberation comes from relinquishing all of our attachments, even the idea of the self. This is something we harp on all the time in esoteric circles now. Buddhists love to talk about it. Everybody really loves to talk about it. You got to get rid of your attachments. You got to release them. They've known about this for quite some time. It's all right here in Inanna's story. And that this leads us to the final city that she goes to acquire. And I think that's the moon. It's the sublunary realm. It's Akkad, embracing the unity beyond the boundaries. The surrender of the royal robe in Akkad signifies the transcending of those boundaries, the recognition of an underlying unity that connects all beings. I don't have to worry about myself because I'm connected to everybody else. If I die, everything else still keeps going. Everybody else is still here, and I live on through them. A piece of me always lives on, because it's all one. It's all one. So we can kind of see in this next slide that her descent, the 7 gates, actually map out pretty well to the 7 acts of her story. Her budding agency at the Hilupu tree, the ambitious ascent, her theft of the Mies from Enki, the falling in love with Dumazi, the testing of her limits against Gilgamesh, and the eventual kind of fallout from that with the death of the Bull of Heaven of Gulgulana, and then her confronting of her mortality in this descent. She dies. Then her acceptance and integration of that, her return. She says, okay, what do I have to give up now? She dies and comes back and still has to give up. She has to give up something that she loves. And she gives up Dumazi. She gives him up for half the year. He has to go live within the underworld. And then the final gate is where she ends up after this. And we see this in all of the hymns that are sung to her through the poetry of Enhidwana. They praise her as this noble being, this noble goddess who went through so much, who came out the other end mature, and who rules with wisdom like Enki, who rules with power and measured action, temperance even. We see this in her mythic structure. All of it basically follows all these gates, what she needs to learn. Looks like we got another comment. Oh, yeah. The Venus Mies, Mercury, Earth, middle of the sun. Oh, we're doing we're doing some mathematics here, people. If you really get into the mathematics, it all starts to make sense rather quickly. Maths is the thing that binds all of this. But now I want to talk about really quickly the comparative pieces of the descents that happen after. So the next one that we really come across is the death of Osiris. And Osiris' story, which I've covered on the channel before, is one that's not voluntary. You could argue maybe Osiris knows it's coming, but Seth kills him, dismembers him. Osiris really doesn't have a say in the matter. He just gets killed and then has to deal with the repercussions of being killed. But there's also a gender inversion here. Now the figure that is going through the katabasis is Osiris. So we have a male figure, and he becomes empowered and actually conquers the realm of the dead. Inanna kind of does that too. Although ereshkigal maintains her importance over the realm of the dead, there is a certain conquering that Inanna does. Osiris straight takes over the realm of the dead. There are some structural differences. The dismemberment is different than the stripping. The stripping away of powers could be somewhat, but it becomes more gory and graphic as we see the others happen. the body parts replace some of the pieces. Um, there's different metaphysical implications as well. It shifts the focus from doing this of your own volition to this one of an involuntary nature. And I think the Inanna myth, because it's tied into Dumazid, does have a fertility aspect to it, which we see mirrored in Persephone going under the world, and basically kind of giving us an allegory for the seasons, reason for the seasons, if you will. But it seems there's not a lot within Osiris's myth that's geared towards what he learns specifically. Inanna's mythic cycle clearly shows what she has to undergo and has to learn in order to rule. Osiris's myth is, at least from my own reading of it, it's something that happens to the guy. And so much of the myth is about Isis and more so than Osiris. So I think that as we look at this, the closer we are to Inanna, the more of a feminine aspect is still present. Even though it's gender inverted here, it's still more about Isis and how she handles death and how and then really how important she becomes in that culture. Osiris is important, but Isis, I think, maintains much more clout in the Egyptian mythology than Osiris. Because then it becomes about Horus and everything that he does afterwards. Osiris kind of takes a back seat, which I guess Dumazy does too. But let's kind of keep moving through here. So it continues, and we see it again in Eleusis and with Orpheus, but it returns. It's a gender reinversion, right? Um, Persephone goes down. Demeter's involved. This is about the feminine principles of fertility at Eleusis. There isn't as much about the male figure here, although we do have it with Orpheus. We have this love as a motivating force, which I think ties into the lover's role with Inanna and Dumazy. But Orpheus, again, I think is participating in this right. It's Eurydice who really goes down there. Orpheus is changed by the whole thing, but it's not. He doesn't die. He doesn't die in that way. But we see this play out again, and it changes throughout history. There's different. It's like bolt-ons, DLCs, if you will, to a game. Different plugins that keep being added from culture to culture, and then ritual innovations too. So the mystery traditions start to come about because of this. We don't have enough evidence to say whether or not they were doing katabatic rituals in ancient Sumer. Not for sure. We can infer that reading the text and going, well, they were definitely modeling the seven gate experience. It's a celestial thing. We know that they were into astronomy. It's pretty safe to say they had that. But we have more evidence of this happening in Eleusis. We have more evidence of this happening with Orpheus. And it happens in a group dynamic too. Then we have it with Dionysus, and this is where it becomes really interesting. This is the first time we see it happening, kind of as I think this comes from Osiris too. You have the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is not just something that they carry with them in their coffin or in on the walls of the pyramids where they're buried. It's not just a funerary rite. It is a rite that you undergo during life to prepare yourself for the moment of death. These people were undergoing these rituals when they were alive to change and transform themselves in life, to live better in life, to in the Egyptian sense of things, to live within accordance of Ma'at, to live within accordance of order and justice, just as Inanna, as the goddess of heaven, of order and justice, does. You start to see this with Dionysus, who is a mirror. It's basically just a Greek Osiris. The Greeks even say it. They're like, we just call him Dionysus here. It is Osiris. We all learned the mysteries from Egypt. But it's through a different mode. There's a divine ecstasy, a madness, and they start using altered states. Dismemberment is a ritual, like they have the Sparagasmos, where they go and they ritually rip apart the bull, which I think probably comes from the death of Gugulana, the bull of heaven. This bull of heaven is also related to Dionysus. Dionysus has so many bull epithets, it's crazy. But we're talking about the same story just through different cultural lenses and being pushed through time to the present day. um, Transcendence through embodiment. That's something the Orphics were about. That's something that Dionysus and his mode of katabasis is through life. We become dismembered through life, dismembered from our origins, and yeah, it's really fascinating to track this through history. I could go on and on and on, but I won't. We'll keep going. The most important thing about Inanna's, I think, is the voluntary aspect of it. She willingly goes down. She doesn't know what her fate is going to be in the underworld. She gets out, but she has to undergo this dismemberment of sorts in order to rise from the ashes. Um, there's other regional variants too. Like this doesn't just stop at Greece. You've got Odin doing it. The hero twins in the Maya civilization undergo a similar thing. Izanagi and Izanami in ancient Japan undergo a katabatic rite, and we have plenty of them like Vainamoinen in Finland does a very similar thing. But there are universal elements, and I'm going to write a piece on this probably on my Substack. So here's where I plug myself. If you want to read a little bit more about what I've been putting out in a more written format, please check the link in the channel description and join the Substack. I don't have any paid material up there yet. It's all free for now, so get in while you can. But I'm going to write a piece on this because there are universal elements, there are gender dynamics that switch, and there are very specific cultural variables that tell us what these cultures are thinking, what unique things they're bringing to the table for a katabasis or katabasis. And from that, I think what we gain is just more material for us as modern practitioners. And that's one of the reasons I love doing content for this channel is because it's not just about looking at the past. It's what do we do with that? What do we do with that now? It's cool to think about the stories. It's cool to kind of reminisce and let our fantasies go with it. But what do you actually do with the data that you collect? And these cultural variables are more comfortable for some of us. Not all of us would want to go through the Egyptian rite, right? Maybe some of us want to do it a Dionysian way. Maybe some of us want to do the seven gate model. And I do have a model built for that I might release here, but I am definitely going to release a piece on how this changes through time because it's fascinating and how the power structures, the dynamics, the hierarchies change and how this is the core myth of the Western esoteric tradition. How do we get here? How do we descend into the body? And then how do we continue to descend or ascend in death? It's through these seven gates that we come down into the embodied experience. And it's through these seven gates that we ascend again, especially if you follow the Neoplatonic model. You're going to have to go back through them. You came through them once. You're going to have to follow them back through. And that's all I got for you guys today. Sorry, I'm running out of steam. Still getting over a touch of the vid. And if you guys have any questions for me, please drop them now, and we'll wrap up today. If you haven't watched the Inanna video, go check it out. It's doing pretty well. People are enjoying it. I can't wait to do the next pieces because I think those are much more intriguing. The story of Dumasid, the way he reacts, man, when the demons from Kerr come to get him, he runs like such a bitch. He runs and he hides, and his sister takes all this heat for him. She even puts out her own eyes and cuts out her own tongue so she won't be able to tell everybody where he's at, and he just hides. And to me, that says something about the character of that deity and the character of Inanna. Inanna willingly goes. She doesn't bitch and moan about it. She just lets what has to happen happen. And in those moments, it's almost like psychedelics. If you've ever gone down the road of psychedelics, there is a moment where you are faced with the challenge of that thing. And when you're faced with that challenge, and you have to either you choose to fight it or you just let it happen. whatever's going to happen. And I think that's the same thing with katabasis in general. Got some people chiming in. Oh, thanks for all the thanks, guys. Yes, go watch the video now. Thank you very much, Brooke. I appreciate very much all of the love, all the love. Thank you, brother. I see you. Oh my God, yes, so much drama. There's so much drama. And we're gonna get into all of it. We're gonna keep going. That's what the mission of this channel is to reveal as much as we can about the mysteries for us here in the modern age. What can we do with this knowledge? And at this time, the way the world is, we couldn't need it more. And I think that's where I'll leave it today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. I will catch you guys next time. We'll do another live next week.